Hello, I am Shivaji Bhaskar, Faculty of Russian at the School of Foreign Languages IGNOU. I welcome you all to this course, Basics of Russian Communication Skills Part 1. As you know that in our previous modules, we have discussed about various cases of the Russian case system, and we have been discussing about the basic expressions which we used with the help of these grammatical aspects in order to express the meaning through the sentences. As we know that largely in a sentence we use nouns, adjective pronouns, the conjugated forms of the verbs, as well as many other aspects of the Russian grammar. But largely in this scheme, the most important part is the cases. So all these cases like the nominative, the prepositional, accusative and genitive. Certain sentences as per the rules of the grammar changes, but to indicate a particular expression we use different cases. Like in nominative, the sentences are simple as they are, but we differentiate between the nouns whether they are animate or inanimate with the help of kto and shto while asking a question about it. The same question changes as per the rules of the grammar. In prepositional case, we use the prepositions like va, na, achom, akom, and in the accusative case we have seen the usage of many other important verbs which indicates the possession. In the genitive case we have seen how certain cases where the ending of the adjectives and nouns they are in agreement changes as per the rules of the grammar, indicating possession, belonging and negation, as well as many other expressions like noga, mala, skolka, nyaskalka and many other expressions like prochev, etc. So here all these expressions which are being used to express different kinds of situations in Russian. Now in this module we will be taking the next case which is known as the dative case. The dative case or dachilny padesh as we know in Russian is used to indicate to whom, and it expresses the relation between the subject and the object with the usage of certain aspects of the grammar. So now let's learn the forms of noun indicating indirect object with the help of dachilny padesh. In Russian language, you use the form of nouns which indicate indirect objects. These indirect objects play an important role in the completion of a sentence. The sentences which have indirect objects like by whom and to whom are being completed by such forms of nouns. To understand it, let's take a few examples. The forms of nouns which indicate indirect object of a verb addresses of communication, like we see ya pishu pismo kamu, I am writing a letter to whom, and suppose if I have a noun like brother, ya pishu pismo, then brat would change into bratu because it is being addressed to somebody. And likewise as per the rules of the grammar, if we replace the noun from masculine to feminine like from brat to sistra, it would be ya pishu pismo sistre. So the question comes is kamu vi pishiche pismo ya pishu pismo sistre ya pishu pismo bratu, etc. So we have to learn the rules of the grammar in order to communicate in this particular case efficiently. So now let's take the singular masculine noun in animate case first. The forms of masculine singular noun denoting indirect object of a verb addressee of a communication while answering the question come. So we have to understand different questions which we use in the Russian case system depending upon the usage of these cases independently and separately. In this case of dachilny padesh or dative case, the first question for the masculine gender is kamu, to whom. Okay, now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few examples. Он часто пишет письма кому другу. So друг changes into другу. And the question would be, кому он часто пишет письма? Друг takes the form of другу. Наташа рассказывала преподавателю о себе. Кому Наташа рассказала о себе? About oneself. Whom does Natasha narrate? So here Natasha narrated or tells преподаватель. So we know преподаватель again belongs to the masculine gender but ends with soft sign. So a soft sign is being replaced by you. Преподавателю о себе. Natasha рассказала преподавателю о себе. Преподаватель takes the form of преподавателю. So this is basically a few examples to make you understand that how the ending of the noun determines the ending of the noun in dative case. So anything which is masculine gender, animate case should change. If it is hard ending like drug, changes into drugu, and if it is with soft sign, changes into you. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more such nouns of the masculine gender. So largely there is a rule that if you have a masculine gender noun in dative case with the question kamu, we put u at the end. How do we understand? Let's pay attention to these examples. So in nominative the question is кто, whom, because it is indicating animate. So сын changes into sinu, brat changes into bratu, ученик changes into ученику, студент changes into studentu, друг changes into другу, сосед changes into соседу. So here you can use the same expression кому вы пишете письмо. Я пишу письмо сыну. Я пишу письмо брату, ученику, студенту, другу, соседу, etc. So the question remains same, but the noun replaces. However, in Russian, you know, the context is very important. That is why while using the expression replacing the nouns with other, please pay attention to the meaning of the sentence. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more such examples. So Ivan changes into Ivanu, Oleg changes into Olegu, Tavarish changes into Tavarishu. But at the same time there are certain exceptions in Russian, as we know that certain words or nouns changes as per the rules which we don't follow in Russian. So they are called exceptions, like Отец changes into Atsu, Продавец changes Продавцу. So these are two exceptions which we have. Rest of the case in dative we follow the same style. Now we are going to take a few examples of the masculine gender noun in singular where the noun ends with soft sign or ikratki. They, as per the general rule, changes into you. To understand it fully, let's pay attention to some of the words. In nominative, the question is кто. In dative, the question is кому. So учитель, преподаватель, водитель, зритель, Андрей, Николай, Василий. Changes into учитель changes into учителю, преподаватель changes into преподавателю, водитель changes into водителю, зритель changes into зрителю, Андрей changes into Андрею, Николай changes into Николаю, Vasily changes into Vasilию. So there are certain other verbs as well we have in dative case, like кому вы позвоните. Позвонить means to call. In this we also use the question кому. So кому позвоните, я позвоню. So you are calling someone. To whom you are calling? I am calling учителю, преподавателю, водителю, зрителю, Андрею, Николаю, Василию. So according to this, you can also replace it with any other example in which we have masculine singular noun which ends with soft sign or ikratki. I hope the concept of using these kind of nouns is clear to you. Now let's pay attention to a few cases which acts as exceptions. So in the nouns where we have the nouns ending with soft sign and ikratri, they should change as per the general rule, but there are certain nouns which are called exceptions like uchyoni and znakomi. Uchyoni changes into uchyonamu, znakomi changes into znakomamu. But papa, djedushka, djadja changes as per the different rule. Papa changes into pape, djedushka changes into djedushke, djadja changes into djaje. As we know, all these three different words, they belong to masculine gender only. However, the ending of these nouns, they resemble to the ending of feminine gender, but they are the nouns of masculine gender. So it should change into pape, djedushke and djaje. So for example, on dala pape, on. So now let's take this example. Ana dala pape knigu. She gave book to his. So she gave father a book. Ana dala pape knigu. Djedushka padaril djaje ruchko. Another example of verbs like dach to give and padarich means to gift, also used in dative case. We have seen the case system where the dative case has some different kinds of verbs. So the first one was pisach, to write, second one was zvanich, third one is dach, and the fourth one is to gift, padarich. So I hope in order to understand and remember these different cases, another most important aspect of the Russian grammar is the usage of its verbs. So there are certain verbs which are only used in certain cases, and that is why with the help of these cases and these verbs you can learn and remember that case and how to use these expressions properly. Now to understand it clearly, let's pay attention to a few exercises. Now we will pay attention to the model. The first one is on dal ruchko. In bracket we have seen. On dal kamu ruchko. On dal sinu ruchko. Dach kamu chivo. To give whom and what. So there we have two cases. Dach kamu dative and afterwards ruchka chivo. Dach kamu chivo. Dach sinu ruchko. So on dal sinu ruchko. Ramesh raskazal kamu. So brat changes into bratu. Interes moju skasku. So skaska changes into skasku. Brat changes into bratu. On chasta pishet, pisach, kamu, djedushka changes into djedushke. Pismo. Uchichil pakazivait. So here these are certain cases where we have used these verbs like dach, raskazach, pisach and now pakazivait. So in this case it is a conjugated form for uchichil. Uchichil pakazivait uchniku knigi na angliskam jezikia. The fourth one is vchera отец позвонил. Vchera, yesterday, father called. Позвонил кому? Знакомому. Он сообщать, also to inform whom? Товарищу, когда будет examen. So we know there are certain verbs like дать, рассказать, писать, показывать, позвонить, сообщать, сообщить. All these are used in dative case. So with the help of such exercise you can also remember with the help of these verbs that how to use them in this case. Now let's take a few examples of the singular feminine noun. The forms of feminine singular nouns denoting indirect objects of a verb, addresses, or communication while answering the question come. So, now we are going to discuss certain verbs with the help of nouns of the feminine gender. We already know padarich, skazać, all are used in the dative case. Now, we will use this in the case of singular feminine noun. Ana padarila sistre igrushku. Kamu ana padarila igrushku. So, when we are asking the question kamu, it indicates to sistra, which changes as per the rules to sistre. Like in masculine, we have seen drug changes into drugu. Now, feminine gender nouns, they change as per the rules of the grammar. For dative, sestra changes into sistre. Anton сказал тёте доброе утро. Кому Anton сказал доброе утро? Тётя changes into тёте. So, as per the rules of the grammar, we have seen it changes. Now, let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more examples. As a general rule, in the nominative case, any noun which ends with a and ya, they are of feminine gender. Now, when we are talking about such cases in the dative, now let's pay attention to the ending of such nouns which belongs to the feminine gender. So, we know девушка, сестра, mama, подруга, внучка, бабушка, they all belong to the feminine gender noun in singular. They must change into as per the rules of the dative case as девушка changes into девушке, сестра changes into сестре, mama changes into mame, подруга changes into подруге, внучка changes into внучке, бабушка changes into бабушке, Masha changes into Mashe, Olga changes into Olge, Nana changes into Nyane, Tyocha changes into Tyoche, and Tanya changes into Tanya. So, this is a general rule of the dative case. For the feminine singular nouns, they should change. A is replaced by ye and ya is also replaced by ye. But we also know that in Russian for genitive, in Russian for nominative, we have certain singular nouns of the feminine gender which ends with iya. So, they are changed to e. How? Let us say Maria changes into Marie and Doj, Mach, these are used as exceptions. So, Doj changes into Docheri, Mach changes into Macheri. Kamu drug padaril ruchku, drug padaril ruchku Docheri. Kamu Anton padaril mashinu, Anton padaril mashinu Macheri. So, as per the rules of the grammar, we have seen Mach changes into Macheri and Doch changes into Docheri. I hope for masculine and feminine the concept of changing the singular nouns is clear. Now, we will go ahead and pay attention to the next one. So, now in order to understand how the singular feminine nouns in dative case changes the endings, let us take a few exercises. Let us pay attention to the model. Anna padarila knigu. Anna padarila sestra changes into sestre. Anna padarila sestre knigu. Likewise, we have a few more examples. The first one is Doj napisala kamu длинное письмо. So, in bracket we have Mach, and as an exception we know Mach changes into Macheri. Дочь написала матери длинное письмо. Преподаватель объяснил кому студентка сложную задачу. So, студентка changes into студентке. Преподаватель объяснил студентке сложную задачу. Она часто звонит. Кому? Она часто звонит подруге. Тетя подарила дочери компьютер на день рождения. Дядя разрешил кому? Марии. Дядя разрешил Марии взять его мобильный телефон. So, here we have seen different cases of the feminine singular nouns in dative being changed as per the rules of the grammar we have learned in this module. But we have to remember a few things in order to use the dative properly. If the age of a person is asked, the word denoting the person in question answer the questions kamu. For example, kamu skolka liet. So the question is, if you are going to ask this question about the age, the question should be skolka vam liet. How old are you? So the question would be skolka vam liet. The answer is minye. I am minye 35 liet. Minye I am 35 years old. So as per the rules of the grammar which we have learned, as far as the numerals are concerned, they are changed like this. But the construction of the question remains same. Skolka vam liet. Minye 22 года. Мне 25 лет. Мне 30 лет, 40 лет, 50 лет, etc. So, дедушке 80 лет. Кому дедушке? That is why дедушка ends with a, changes into дедушке 80 лет. 80 лет. 80 years old. Отцу 45 лет. Кому? Отцу 45, 45 years old. Сестре 10 лет. Sister is 10 years old. Nine 3 года. So Nina is 3 years old. So like this we have this kind of construction for sentences in dative to answer the question kamu skolka liet. Who is how many years old? And then we answer like this. Now we must remember that in expressions kamu, nravится, кто and что. Nravится means to like. Whom? Nravится likes what? And who? Who likes whom, what? The subjects answer the questions kamu and the object answer the question кто and что. The number of the verbs singular and plural the same as the number of the object. To understand this concept, let's pay attention to the example. Кому нравится кто и что? Отцу нравится этот человек. Кому нравится, отцу нравится, что нравится and кто нравится. In the case of человек, we are using что, кто нравится отцу, отцу нравится этот человек. Брату нравится эта красная машина. Брату нравится кто and что. Красная машина inanimate, that is why это красная машина. Сестре нравится ребенок соседа. Сестре нравится этот парк, etc. So with the help of this construction you understood the usage of the word nravится, which means to like. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few examples. But we have to understand with the help of these expressions that брату нравятся эти дети, сестре нравятся игрушки. In expressions кому нужно нельзя, who asks, who, which means who ought to, who ought not to. Кому нужно, кому нельзя. The subject asks the questions кому. So кому нужно надо изучать русский язык, who ought to study Russian language. Другу нужно или другу надо изучать русский язык. So like this is a construction which we use in dative in order to understand the nuances of the dative case well with the help of such examples. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more examples. Подруге нужно или надо изучать русский язык. Кому нельзя давать важные документы? Who ought not to be given important documents? Ребенку нельзя давать важные документы. Девочке нельзя давать важные документы. So like this you change the subject as per the rules of the grammar for the dative case and change the ending of these nouns. Now let's pay attention to certain nouns with preposition ka. As in dative case we use the preposition ka to indicate two words. Preposition ka is followed by a question kamu. Кому он ходил, ушел, Padashol, etc. On едет к кому? Он едет к брату. He is going to his brother. Она едет к бабушке. К кому она едет? Она едет к бабушке. Студент идет к университету. Студент идет к чему? So here we are changing this with чему because inanimate. So к кому and к чему are basically indicates whether we have the noun in animate or inanimate. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more examples. Туристы едут к музею. Девушка подошла к машине. Он читал трудные слова к началу рассказа, etc. So here you have seen certain other constructions of the sentences where we have used the expression к кому, к чему. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more examples. Singular masculine noun inanimate, for which we have already discussed the question чему. So in nominative the question is что, means what. In dative the question is чему. Дом, стол, холод, учебник, университет. All these examples are of inanimate. Changes into when the question is чему, as дом дому, стол столу, холод холоду, учебник учебнику, and университет университету. Роман роману, концерт концу, конец концу, вечер вечеру. So here you have seen how they are changing as per the rules of the grammar of the dative case. Now we'll take this part which talks about the noun which ends in soft sign or ikrat-ki. So we have questions like muzei, portfel, karabil. All these inanimate nouns changes into muzeiu, portfeliu, karabliu. Okay, now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more examples. So muzei changes into muzeiu, but if we take examples of the singular feminine nouns in inanimate like kniga, machina, what happens? Kniga changes into knige, machina changes into machine, ulitsa changes into ulitse, komnata changes into komnate, karchina changes into karchine, pesne changes into pesne, zimlya changes into zimlye, stachya changes into stachye, uchoba changes into uchobe, and portfel changes into portfel. Karabil changes into karabliu. Portfel changes into portfliu. So here let's see a few more examples of the feminine singular nouns in dative. These nouns which ends with soft sign changes into, as per the rules of the grammar for dative, as noch changes into nochi, dver changes into dveri, bol changes into bol. So largely the soft sign is replaced by e. Okay, now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more such examples. The nouns of the feminine gender which ends with ia changes into ee, like linea changes into lini, laboratoria changes into laboratory. Now as we have discussed the masculine feminine nouns, now we have discussed the masculine feminine gender nouns. Now we shall take the neuter gender singular nouns which ends with o and e. In nominative the question is что, and in dative the question is чему, because we are talking about inanimate nouns. So окно, письмо, лицо, начало, утро, яйца changes into окно changes into окно, письмо changes into письмо, лицо changes into лицо, начало changes into началу, утро changes into утро, яйца changes into яйцу. Общежитие changes into общежитию, здание changes into зданию, and упражнение changes into упражнению. But words like palto, radio, taxi, cafe, coffee, they don't change and they don't go under any changes because they are exceptions while answering the question чему. Now, let us pay attention to a few exercises in order to understand these different nouns. Друзья идут к, les changes into к лесу. Ученые идут к, лаборатория changes into лаборатории. Все знают эту любовь к учебе. Все знают ее любовь к учебе, etc. So, all these cases which you have learned, you can solve the exercises very easily. Now, since we have already discussed all three aspects of the singular nouns in masculine, feminine and neuter, in case of dative, which largely asks a question, come. For inanimate, the question changes into chim. However, there are certain verbs which indicates whether the sentence belongs to the dative, such as писать, письмо, кому, подарить, кому, рассказать, кому, and звонить, кому. So, all these and many more verbs which you have learned in these modules ask the question kamu. Then we have learned about an expression kakamu and kachimu, which gives direction to whom. So, with this we learn about the dative or dachilni case in details about various other expressions which you can also use with the help of your family and friends while using the vocabulary which you have learned in this module, and make small text and passages so that you can also learn the basics of Dachilni Padesh with efficiency. I hope you all liked this module very much. In the upcoming module, we will be discussing about the nouns in plural, adjectives, etc. in dative. Thank you.